to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
The Hockey Time Machine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Tonight, a celebration of life, the life of TV sports legend Ralph Mellanby. I was curious what role Ralph had in bringing Peter Puck to Hockey Night.
Well, I'm sure he had a big role to play. It was originally Peter Puck was invented or created for NBC. When we were doing the NBC games for 3 years in the 70s, our director, and a man I hold as highly in my esteem as I do Ralph, was Scotty Connell. He was like a Ralph clone, or Ralph was a clone of Scotty, whatever. But they were both superb at what they did, and they could see a creation like Peter Puck being a great advantage on the show for at least a short time. And that's what Scotty did, and Ralph got involved, and I believe he went to Hollywood even and to help them out there. And of course, he'd be instrumental in getting him on Hockey Night in Canada. And I just wish he'd lasted a little longer, but there is a group approaching me recently about a reintroduction of Peter Puck, and I hope they have the wherewithal to do that. We'll wait and see, but I don't get optimistic or not too optimistic at this age.
Probably a smart approach. Hey, I want to talk about a clip. I'm going to play a clip, and I hope you can hear this. It's you and Don Cherry in the booth for a Colorado Rockies Toronto Maple Leafs game. So let's listen to this, and then I'll have you comment.
Okay.
And this Saturday night, we have Don Cherry with us in the Gauntlet Maple Leaf Garden. Who's this fella, Don?
Well, that's Mike. I got accused of assaulting him last year. All I did was shake him and tell him to come off. But by the time I got to New York, it looked like I assaulted him.
Yeah, it made all the papers.
Yeah, well, he's a pretty good kid. He gets 20 goals a year, and he's all right.
You made up afterwards, huh? No hard feelings?
Well, not really.
Not really?
Well,
all right.
Still kind of strained. Got to be shook once in a while, that's all.
Just shake him up?
Yeah.
But on the bench?
Sure.
I thought you'd like that hit a moment ago by Slava Duras, the Czech defender.
Yeah, that must have been an accident. But
No,
anyhow,
come
you
on
see.
now.
Well, yeah, it was pretty good. But you notice that Dubois never stepped back. We don't talk about the sticks anymore, because if you say my stick's not any good, I'll say yours. So it's like a status quo. Nobody says anything.
Well, if you didn't talk about all the things you're not supposed to talk about, you wouldn't have much to say up here.
He's calling the magician.
Yeah, why?
Well, I don't know. I used to say he got 7 goals in 2 years. I call him a magician now. He could stay in the National League for 2 years scoring 7 goals.
You and Don could have sold a lot of tickets taking that act on the road.
Well, I loved working with Don. I missed what he said earlier because we had a little bit of an audio problem, and I miss not getting together with Don like we used to, and going out with him after a game for a pop or two, as he would call it. I can remember it being in Montreal one night in the tavern, and a third party came over and said something to me. I didn't hear it. He said, I didn't like what you said about Guy Lafleur tonight, or something of that lines. And Don came to my defense, and he used some pretty colorful language in telling this young man where he should head out into the night and how he should do it. And I said, Don, I can look after myself. He said, no, he shouldn't have said that to you. He said, it really gets me mad when they do that, things like that. So to make amends, I guess or to give him a little treat the next day, I took him to the museum, and all he wanted to see was the sailing ships. And he talked about it on TV that night during the intermission. Brian took me to the museum. He said, there are lots of sailing ships there. Then he took me to a bookstore, and he said he didn't buy a book. Larry Hillman used to do me like that in Rochester. He'd take me around. He'd never buy anything, and I'd come home with $200 worth of this or that. And that day in the bookstore, he must have bought 6 books, most of them about sailing ships, I'm sure.
Okay, one last clip before we let you go, and we've got a baseball guy coming up next. But one more clip. This is a reporting you did. This is a rarely seen clip, Brian, of you reporting ahead of Rendezvous 87.
There's been a lot of controversy over Rendezvous 87. Some NHL players are reluctant to play the Soviets in the 2-game series. We have the Soviets and the NHL represented here tonight. First, the Soviets. The interpreter, Aggie, would you ask your star player how he feels about Rendezvous 87?
Blue jeans. Chicks.
What he says is, in terms of national prestige and of meeting our Canadian friends again, we are looking forward to it with great anticipation.
Oh, that's good. Now the NHL side. How do the NHL players feel about Rendezvous 87?
How do the NHL players feel about Rendezvous 87?
Oh, well, personally, I have other projects that I'm working on, like a sequel to my hockey video called Hockey Hairstyles My Way.
Second City. Yeah. I don't know where those Russian guys, maybe they're in the army now.
Brian, it has been such a pleasure catching up with you again. You were so kind to me when we were on discussing your book a while back. And thank you so much for taking the time and working through the technical issues so you could add your thoughts about Ralph and your time at Hockey Night.
Well, thank you, Glenn. You did a great job as a host, and you're doing one tonight. And certainly the condolences of the McFarlands to all the Mellanbys go out. He will be missed. He was a legend, an icon, and a pretty damn good guy. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. Here's what the Toronto Star said about our next guest, Tony Kubek, in 1989, when he ended a 13-year run on Blue Jays telecasts. Quote, when the Blue Jays were both thrilling and embarrassing us all over the league in the early days of expansion, Kubek was the biggest star the team had, albeit from the broadcast booth. Tony, thank you for joining us. Tell us about your relationship with Ralph and how you ended up north of the border.
Well, first, may I just make a comment about Mr. McFarland and, of course, Don Cherry. I was trying to figure out which sport coat or jacket I would really want to wear on the air. And either Brian's or Don Cherry, who he kind of inherited the Pinky Lee estate or something. Because I would take that jacket anywhere, in a classy place or anywhere else. But really, I'm on here with hockey guys, and I'm a baseball guy. But then I thought about it for a while. And I said, you know, Ralph Mellanby was a baseball guy too. I first met him, I think it was 1976. I was working with Kurt Gowdy doing the Game of the Week, and the franchise was just acquired by the Toronto area to get the Blue Jays. And Ralph came down with a bunch of other guys to watch and see how NBC did their work in the truck, what was happening in the booth. And I had a brief introduction to Ralph, probably within a minute, when he came up to the booth and stood behind us when we were broadcasting to see how technical angle worked here. He already knew all this stuff from hockey. And immediately you knew he was a guy you could like. He had a friendly face. His demeanor was so professional. He was kind. He had empathy for broadcasters and everybody else, because we'd make a lot of mistakes. So I got to know him quite well. And then I really find out quite a bit later that he actually was a professional baseball player. And coincidentally, his first year in 1954, he played in the 3I League in the States, which was Indiana, Iowa, and Illinois. And he played for Cedar Rapids, I believe. he was a shortstop. The very next year, my second year in professional baseball, I played in the Class B League, which was third from the bottom of the totem pole in professional baseball. Then I was a shortstop, and I played for the Quincy Gems, who was also in the 3I League. So we were about a year apart from playing against each other. I could just see him trying to make a double play with me trying to slide and upset him, or he doing the same thing to me on the other side of the field. But you could tell immediately with how friendly he was, how kind he was, what a gentleman he was. And I've heard legacy mentioned so darn many times as I've listened to some of the other guys who worked so well with him. And sometimes I think, yeah, awards and trophies and accolades are so great for a legacy. But Ralph's legacy, I think, was really the way he didn't forget where he came from. The guys who trained him, and he went right along and employed guys, some of whom we've already heard tonight, and I've listened to very carefully. They were his legacy, and he passed his legacy to them. And I think that's important. There's so many egos in the broadcasting business and the television business. He didn't have an ego. I think he wanted to share any glory that he got with whomever he worked with. And that was a real team player in the broadcast industry. But Ralph was a terrific guy. I just loved him. I wish I could have spent more time with him. But I think I'm in Wisconsin right now, a little town called Appleton, Wisconsin. And I know some of his kids, two of his kids, Scott and Laura, shared some of Wisconsin because they went down to the University of Wisconsin, which is an hour and a half from me. I had a football scholarship there, but I chose baseball. So they brought a little bit of that class from Wisconsin to Ralph and to the Canadian population. I'll take credit for some of that being a Wisconsinite. Yeah, but he was a terrific guy. I never had seen a professional hockey game. I was in playgrounds, I was in gyms, I wasn't good in school. But when I got to Canada, he said to me, if you've never seen a hockey game, and he knew I hadn't, he said, you've got to see him in the Maple Leaf Garden. Well, he arranged for another dear friend that I spoke to the other day, Doug Kelcher, and we ended up, I don't know, it was in the rafters. And I said, man, talk about wild. I thought the bleachers in Wrigley Field or the bleachers in Yankee Stadium or in Brooklyn were rowdy. That was a rowdy crowd, but they were very dedicated fans. So he got me to see my first hockey game, which was a real thrill for me up in Toronto.
One thing you were right about, and we should mention, is that Ralph wasn't just a hockey guy or an Olympics guy. He did baseball with the Expos and the Blue Jays. He did golf. He did tennis. He did the Canadian Football League. But did he ever talk to you about what was his unfilled dream, which was to be a major league player?
Oh, yeah. I not that directly, but you knew that whatever he did, he was going to do it right, and whether he stayed in baseball, he'd have been a success in that probably. I knew he was a good fielder. That he told me. I'm not so sure about his hitting, but if he could catch the ball and throw the ball and run the bases, he would have made it in that sport too. But he obviously chose the right way to go, or they choose him because he was so great in everything he did. The last conversation I had with Ralph, when I was accepted into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. First guy that called me was Scott Crawford, who was running. I think he still is up there in Canada. And he told me I was elected. And within minutes afterwards, I got a call from Ralph Mellanby. And he said, I can't wait to see you when you come to the ceremony. I said, Ralph, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be able to come. I've had some surgery that went wrong. I'm getting old. I just can't. I don't travel anymore. I can't travel anymore. He said, Doug Kelcher and I'll come pick you up in the car. I said, I don't think I could make that. And he said, what if I chartered a plane for you? I'm saying, this guy's unbelievable. And so I had talked to him, and then I talked to him again. He was coming to make a trip, I think, to Hudson, Wisconsin, where Scott, I think, had a home for a while, his son, whom I never met. And he said, how far are you from Madison? I said, well, we've got a cottage just a little ways south of Lake Superior, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He said, well, we're going to be coming through on Highway 22. I said, we're 5 miles away. He said, I'm stopping to see it. Well, it didn't happen. We couldn't pull it off and so forth. But I thought I would have seen him that time too, to just enjoy some of the stories. But whatever he was going to do, he was going to do well at it. And he was meticulous. He was a guy that didn't want to take any of the glory from anybody else. Just listening to some of the guys he hired or who worked for him or with him, you just know how much they cherished just his friendship aside from his professionalism. He was something. He was a real special person.
Along with broadcasting Jays games, Tony, you were sort of an unofficial coach. You'd actually put on a Blue Jays uniform but you did it for free. How come?
I needed some exercise. You get on planes when I was doing NBC and Toronto early on. I wasn't getting much time at home. I'd sneak home for a day or two and then get to the next venue. Or sometimes I'd come in. One time I came and I dressed in the John and the old exhibition stadium because I had just gotten off a plane from a game out on the West Coast, got in the booth and pretended I knew what I was talking about. But yeah, I used to love to do that. You know, some of the coaches that through batting practice, they were throwing it every day. Their arms would get a little tired. And you know, if you're a shortstop, you threw every day, and you can usually throw strikes too. And a lot of the hitters like that too. So I got a chance to pitch a little bit to Jesse Barfield and Lloyd Mosby early on, and saw some of the Dominicans come in and stuff. And I don't want to get off track talking about myself. The Ralph's the guy who's the star of this show, and he just taught me so much. We talked a little bit of baseball, but I think he was trying to teach me more about hockey. And I knew I was smart enough that I couldn't teach him anything about baseball. He was a professional, and he did do baseball games in Canada and other places. But he came to, like I said, to learn how baseball was telecast. And I think he probably, somebody, I think it was Brian, mentioned Scotty Connell. Scotty Connell was he could have been a twin brother or a Siamese twin, with Scotty Connell. Scotty Connell was a guy who really looked at different camera angles. One of the famous shots in baseball was in 1975 when Cincinnati Reds Game 6 were playing Boston Red Sox, and Fisk got up to the plate, and they had sent me down for the last inning into Sparky Anderson's dugout. And I went down through the runway, and I was standing down on the steps so I wouldn't be seen on camera. And all of a sudden, I see Sparky turn to his pitching coach, Sugar, and said, "Shugs, how many pitches is Darcy?" He's the guy that threw the pitch. And Sugar, his pitching coach, said he threw 39 pitches. He came in relief, and Sparky said, And here goes the ball over the fence. I was ready to do an interview with Sparky. Next thing, I'm doing an interview with Punch Fist. But it was Scotty Connell who walked out with me to Fenway Park to the scoreboard down low, the old scoreboard where they had holes in it to put the numbers up. It's still there. And he found one hole where they could get a cameraman in there who was really set there by Scotty Cameron. I asked him if they would just take a look at it. And Scotty was kind of the genius in that area too. And he probably got a lot of it from Ralph Mellanby too. So it was really good to see what, how they got that shot, and an alert cameraman got that shot. And Scotty Connell was one of the guys that we walked back there, and there was a rat story told earlier when we walked back to the day before that first game of the World Series to put that camera out there. Here are rats crawling all over the place. The cameraman said, "I'm not going to shoot from down there." So there was a rat story there too, because they were crawling on the guy's shoulder while he was trying to shoot that shot. But he got a great shot. A lot of it was due to Scotty Connell.
Well, thank you, Tony. As a talent guy, it's nice of you extolling the virtues of the men in the truck who are mostly unseen and unheard. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your memories of Ralph and your time educating the baseball fans of Canada in the finer points of the American national pastime.
Well, I knew one thing, Glenn, when I did get the offer for that job, I played with Elston Howard, who really should be in the Hall of Fame. And Elston talked more than one times about how great he was accepted in the Toronto area, the further minor league team. Sparky Anderson also mentioned it to me. He said, when I was at the Hall of Fame, he said, "You had a chance to work up in Canada." I said, "Oh, yeah." He knew I'd been up there for almost 12 years for a while, And he talked about it. Dick Williams talked about being up there. Tommy Lasorda did, but he was kind of thrilled with Montreal because he pitched out of Montreal for the Dodgers franchise. But my sincerest condolences to Scotty's family, to Laura and Scott and all else. But he's left so many memorable things. He's going to have a legacy, not just because of all the awards and Emmys and the Miracle on Ice that Al Michaels call and Scotty had so much to do with, but his legacy is going to be what we've heard from a lot of the guys who've been on the show thus far. What a great guy he was, how trustworthy he was, how honest he was, how when you got in trouble as a broadcaster for saying the wrong and doing something else, he'd come to your rescue. And those are the kind of guys you want on your side.
One of only 53 men in Major League history to hit a home run in his final at bat, Tony Kubek. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thanks, Glenn. Good seeing your face, Laura. God's blessings to you all. Bye-bye.
Now a story. In the early 70s, Ralph Mellanby wanted a new host for Hockey Night, and one of the finalists was a Canadian announcer named Alex Trebek. Legend has it that the network president told Ralph he'd refuse to hire Trebek due to a particular feature of Alex's face, his mustache. The pair had a phone conversation shortly before Trebek died in 2020, and Ralph told the Buffalo News it went like this. Quoting Ralph, I said, "This is a voice from your past, Ralph Mellanby." And Alex said, "Ralph, you haven't called me in 4 expletive years." Then I, this is Ralph speaking, told him the story about how the mustache possibly cost him the job. And he laughed like hell. The man who got the Hockey Night job, hosting gig that Alex Trebek didn't get, was Dave Hodge, who was the TV play-by-play voice for the Sabres for their first season in 1970, where he worked with Ralph Mellanby. Dave was kind enough to share his thoughts in a recorded testimonial.
Hello, everybody. The Hockey Night in Canada jacket is here. I just can't put it on because that would take up all of my time, if you know what I mean. So I first want to say that I am thankful for the opportunity to talk about Ralph. I'm sorry that a previous commitment prevents me from joining a live discussion and connecting again with friends and former colleagues. Hello and best wishes to all of them. Ralph Mellanby changed my life. There is no other way to put it. He and others, to be sure, took a chance on an untested 26-year-old radio announcer back in 1971. How in the world was I qualified to host Hockey Night in Canada? And I said that when I was asked to audition. And initially, I declined the opportunity to audition. Ralph's trusted lieutenant, game producer Bob Gordon, told me that Ralph's instructions were to sleep on it and see if tomorrow brings a change of mind. After all, he said, it's an hour out of a day. And I did wake up and say, what the hell? And I proceeded to do the worst audition imaginable. I walked out of the door and I said, sorry for wasting your time. And Frank Selke Jr. called me back and he said, we, Ralph, Bob, Frank, higher up sponsors wanted me to do it again because it could be better. Well, I agreed with that. I took another half hour out of the day and sure enough, it was better because it couldn't have been worse. A few days later, the phone rang and it was Ralph Mellanby, executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada. And he said, kid, you're the new host of the most popular TV show in the country. And he never stopped calling me kid, except for the last time we spoke, a few days before he died. He said in a weak and halting voice, thank you for calling, Dave. And it sounded strange not to be called kid, but it sounded nice to be called Dave. Anyway, back to the hiring. I asked him what he was thinking, what in the world he was thinking. And he said he and others, to be sure, liked the fact that I knew nothing about TV, so they could teach me, they could groom me and not have to worry about a single bad habit that I had developed in my television past because I didn't have any habits from any television past. Ironically, the greatness of Ralph Mellanby in my mind became his willingness to let me grow into the job as I saw fit. He had confidence that I knew exactly how to approach that esteemed position. I knew from watching Hockey Night all my life and gaining an appreciation of what worked and what might be done differently or better. Now, I needed to know the basics. Obviously, there's more than one camera in the studio. I talked to the one in the red light, with the red light. Okay, fine. I did have what we'll call long hair at the time, Beatlesque, so we say. And I asked Ralph if my first assignment was to cut it. And he said quite the opposite, grow it a bit more. I like it. And then I got it. They wanted me to look as young as I was while trying to act about 20 years older. Ralph's trust in me was so helpful and valuable. There were times when the show required what we'll call a special or different opening. Ralph would write a script that fit those circumstances because he knew them. He was the executive producer, but he would always say, that's the outline. You change it the way you want it, kid. And I would, and he'd always laugh and tell me later he liked the opening script he had written. You can't ask for more from a boss than to be told, do it your way if you think it's better than my way. I told him in that last phone call that we had fun, very often at somebody's expense. You needed some thickness in your skin. And Ralph wore a target called Scott Mellanby. Dad would come into the studio on a Saturday afternoon and tell us how many goals Scotty had scored that week. And he'd tell us his kid was going to make the NHL. And he'd be on Hockey Night in Canada. And we'd say, sure, Ralph, everybody's son is bound for the NHL, but thanks for the update. And he'd leave the room and we'd laugh some more about hockey dads and our own example, Ralph. And we do that until draft day of 1984, the first ever televised NHL draft, by the way, also known as the Mario Lemieux draft. And we stayed on the air until the 27th pick by the Philadelphia Flyers, Scott Mellanby, Henry Carr, Junior B. Young Scott Mellanby, who scored all those goals we heard about for the vaunted Don Mills Flyers, had indeed made the NHL. And he stayed there for 21 seasons. When Ralph died, I said sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the dad is right. I'm sure in different settings, he was predicting great things for Laura in the business world. And he was right again. Fun. I said we had fun. I remember fun in Boston particularly. Ralph came to me a short while before game time and he said, there's this guy wandering the halls of Boston Garden in a full bear costume, Bruin costume, if you will, complete with a huge head that made him almost twice as tall. And Ralph decided to talk to this guy, first to ask him how it must have been in all of that fur, how hot he was. Ralph told me this rabid Boston fan had some interesting comments about the love he had for hockey and for his favorite team. And he was quite a character. Maybe we should take a camera into the crowd and interview the Boston Bear. Not for long, just a snippet, just for fun. Well, I did the setup. I asked my first question. I waited for him to take off the huge head and give me the answer. Well, he gave the answer, I assume, but I couldn't hear it. And the audience couldn't hear it because his words couldn't be distinguished because he was still wearing the huge head. I motioned to him to remove it and he froze. He stopped talking. He wrestled with the head, had trouble getting it off. And then I gave up and threw the commercial with some sort of line about our inability to penetrate the Bruins' defense, which was probably the case for the Leafs that night. Later, Ralph said, the Boston Bear didn't work out, did he, kid? And we both laughed. But not as hard as the time Ralph knew of another guest we should have in Boston. Senator Edward Ted Kennedy was going to be at the game. Ralph had the Bruins PR contact the Secret Service and the Senator's attaché, and sure enough, we would be able to get Senator Kennedy to come to our tiny studio in the bowels of Boston Garden for an intermission interview. We were on very high alert, things we couldn't do, shouldn't say, and with a few minutes left to play in the second period, the entourage arrived. Senator Kennedy surrounded by bodyguards and the like, and I welcomed him with reverence. And could we get him anything, do anything for him while we waited for the period to end? And he said, matter-of-factly, is there anywhere I can take a piss? Well, enough of the protocol then. Now it was a bunch of guys in a small space next to a shower room that had a urinal. But we had a floor director named Fausto Belloamini, who could best be described as nervously excitable. And he was literally shaking in the presence of Senator Kennedy. He had trouble affixing a microphone to the Bruins jersey of our initial guest, who was Boston's backup goalie, Gilles Gilbert. The Senator watched from the wings, and when the Gilbert interview ended, I threw the commercial, and Fausto just about threw up. He leaped forth, he ripped the mic off our first guest, and he yelled, Gilbert, get out of here. Kennedy, get in here. Well, what did the Senator expect? We gave him a place to piss. The interview went okay. He was not wearing anything on his head. I could go on. Ralph at an international television symposium in Banff, watching his jewel of a show, Hockey Night in Canada, a Leaf game ending, and bonus coverage of a tight game between Montreal and the Philadelphia Flyers. Canadians leading by a goal until the Flyers tied it and forced overtime on a goal by Scott Mellanby. There was Ralph in Banff, proudly glowing in the presence of TV executives from around the world. His show, his son scoring a goal that forced overtime that we couldn't cover to its conclusion because the CBC wouldn't let us. And the host showed his disapproval and flipped his pen while signing off with disgust. And Ralph turned to the head of Russian television and said something about free speech, and then a lot more about Scott Mellanby's latest NHL goal. And his 5 Emmy Awards would have been mentioned earlier, I'm sure. Ralph discovered one of the most famous personalities in Canadian television history, Don Cherry. He created Coach's Corner. He hired Hockey Night in Canada's first female announcer, Helen Hutchinson. He worked with two Hewitts, Gallivan, Irvin, McFarlane, Cole, Meeker, Goldham, so many others who wore those baby blue jackets. He helped me deal with Harold Ballard. No, actually, that was one thing he couldn't do. We had fun. I keep saying that. We dressed Red Story as Santa Claus at Christmas time, and we invited Ballard to sit on Santa's knee while I asked Santa/Red what he would give to this guy who had everything. And Red said, penicillin. Laughs, and that moments, so many that I was sure I didn't deserve back in 71. Thanks to Ralph, I watched an entire generation of NHL players come and go. I watched Gilbert Perreault's first NHL game, and when he retired in 1987, there wasn't a single player left from my first night on the job in 71. I like to call them Hockey Night in Canada's golden years. I have some proof. I was there for 8 Montreal Stanley Cup wins, including 4 in a row, 4 straight for the Islanders, 4 in 5 years for the Oilers, 3 with Wayne Gretzky, 2 for the Broad Street Bullies, and 1 for Bobby Orr and the Bruins, and none for the Leafs. That would get me fired all over again. Thank you for this chance to speak about Scott's dad, Laura's dad, Janet's and Jillian's husband, Louise and Jim's brother, grandkids, and other members of the Mellanby family. Thank you, Ralph, for above all else, trusting me.
And our great thanks to Dave Hodge. Now, as for me, I've made probably a disastrous decision to keep two very important people, Doug Beforth and Jeff Mason, waiting as long as I have. So we're going to correct that in a moment. First, let me bring on Laura. And anything that you want to share about the proceedings thus far? I know you'd like to join the beginning of our conversation with Doug. Oh, you are muted.
Story of my work life. I seem to always forget the mute button, but I'm not alone in that. Before we get to Doug, I did want to just read. I have a couple of tributes before we go to Jeff too from some ABC folks, but I wanted to just first of all, Mr. Hodge's comments really were very moving at the end. Gorgeous. I wanted to just read a quick note from Brian Williams. He wrote the foreword for my dad's second book, and we all know who he is. He needs no introduction. Ralph was a longtime and great friend. He was a giant in our industry on both sides of the border. In the U.S., he was an Emmy Award winner and highly respected by ABC Sports, for whom he worked several Olympics. Ralph was the pro's pro, and still he had always had time to help and encourage young broadcasters like myself. So if we can go to Doug, that'd be great. Great pictures. Geez, just what fascinates me, Glenn, is that the video that you and Paul had at the beginning of Dad, when he was so young. And I, of course, I would have been 2 or 4 years old or whatever when that. And so it's just so nice to see him so young and so handsome. He looks great. He would love that. Hi, Doug.
Hello, Laura. Hello, Glenn.
I'm so sorry I forgot to send you the link for this.
Story of my life.
And I forgot to send the link to John Shannon, who's now in a production meeting in the Olympics. So my bad. I have grief brain a little bit, I think, but so glad at least you're able to come on. And I just wanted to be on with you for the first few minutes because, of course, we worked together for 13 years. Just as you were Dad's protege, you brought me along and mentored me so much in the early part of my career, took wonderful care of me. And that really, that was really nice for my dad. And he really appreciated that. So I just wanted to share that with you. Anyway, Glenn, please take it away. And I can't wait to hear your stories, Doug.
All right. Doug, at least Laura has the excuse of grief brain. I only have the excuse of addled brain. So thank you for putting up with me. As an introduction, Doug worked alongside Ralph Mellanby at Hockey Night, and like Ralph, he also made a name for himself with Olympics coverage. In fact, he helped give birth to the Hockey Netcam, which must have pleased Ralph no end. And later, Doug served as president of Canada's Sportsnet. So, Doug, I want to start off by asking you about leading up and during the Olympics in Calgary. You spent a great deal of time alongside Ralph, maybe more than anyone else. What stands out for you about Ralph, the person?
Ralph was larger than life. You always knew when Ralph was in the room because everybody gravitated toward him. He was a leader who loved to lead, and people loved that he was their leader. But Ralph was very, very generous with both his time and his expertise. In the fall of 1974, I was a second-year student in radio and television arts at Ryerson in Toronto. And I chose for my big project of the year that I would go and tell the story of how Hockey Night in Canada was produced each week. So I did a cold call to CSN, Canadian Sports Network, which was the company that produced Hockey Night in Canada, on behalf of CBC on Saturday nights and CTV on Wednesday nights. And they were very nice. They invited me to come in and said, someone will talk to you about what we might be able to do to help you out. And so in I go to the office, and they say, hang on a few minutes out here in the lobby. And then they escorted me into this office. And a smiling guy jumped out of his chair, stuck out his hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Ralph Mellanby." And I was flabbergasted. And here I am, a kid wet behind the ears. And all of a sudden, I'm in the same room with the guy who is certainly the best ever in Canada when it comes to hockey presentation, and quite likely the world. And Ralph always, as a sidebar, that was another thing Ralph always did, was he would always, when he met somebody, he would say, "Hi, I'm Ralph Mellanby." And that broke any ice, any apprehension that the other person had. And that was just a trademark of how Ralph comported himself. Ralph gave me almost an hour of his time. Again, here's this student who is not even sure whether this is real or not. And I'm talking to the guy who made hockey on television what it is. And that's the best example I can give of many about just how generous Ralph was. And he didn't need people to know that he was generous. That was just his nature. But he sure was very, very helpful and open to sharing himself with others. Ralph was a big star here in Canada. His name was well known. I wondered for quite a while why he had never gone to the States like so many other Canadians had done when they became at the top of their field. And he said to me, "It's better to be a big fish in a medium-sized pond than one of a lot of fish in a big pond." Now, the reality is that Ralph got his cake and ate it too, because he was able to stay as a big fish in the medium-sized pond, but his international opportunities, like when he worked with ABC in Innsbruck and Lake Placid and Sarajevo, that was the best of the world. So yeah, maybe he was a big fish in a medium-sized pond, but he also was a pretty sizable fish in the bigger pond. So as I say, Ralph was a star, but I always sort of found it interesting, and I would chuckle a little bit at this, that Ralph's eyes would light up when he had any connection with anybody in the entertainment business. Here's a guy that produced Stanley Cup championships, the first Blue Jays game. He had many notches in his belt, but more than once he said to me that one of the most cherished things that he had done in the business was a entertainment special that he produced at CFCF in Montreal. And the star of the show was Petula Clark, who sang Downtown for Ralph on his show. And his eyes would light up when he told that story. When Ralph got to his hotel in Innsbruck, when he was working, ABC had hired him to be their hockey producer. And he's walking down the hall to his room, and he gets to his room and he hears next door that somebody's playing the guitar. So Ralph goes in and drops his bag and comes back out, and in Ralph's very friendly manner, he knocks on the door, and the door opens, and Ralph, "Hi, I'm Ralph Melby." And the response back is, well, hi, I'm John Denver. And ABC had hired John Denver to be part of their coverage of the Olympics in, very beautiful Austria. And a large part of what John did was sing songs on the broadcast. So Ralph would talk many times about how lucky he was to have more than several weeks as John Denver as his next door serenader. Another story that Ralph tells from Innsbruck was at the end of the game's ABC party, he got to dance with Dorothy Hamill, who had won the women's gold medal in figure skating. Ralph was a star, but he also didn't take himself all that seriously. And there was a joke that he told on himself that I've heard tens of times, and it's pretty funny. And it goes this way: that Ralph, after he made the big time, and he was well known and done Stanley Cups and Olympics and everything else, he went back to his hometown in or near Essex in southwestern Ontario, close to Windsor, and he ended up at either a high school reunion or something else, where there was a crowd and people were mingling and chatting, and he comes up to a guy and says, "Hi, I'm Ralph Mellanby," and the guy says, "Oh, what do you do, Ralph?" And Ralph sort of modestly says, "Well, I'm in TV." And the guy says, "Oh, how are they selling these days?" So those are the stories I can tell you about Ralph as a person. He was bigger than life, but his heart was just as big as he was.
You mentioned dancing with Dorothy Hamill, and I remember reading that at a different Olympics, he would go jogging with Peggy Fleming.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, he was a star, and he hobnobbed with the stars.
And you mentioned ABC and the States. So Roone Arledge is often credited with transforming both sports and news programming in the States. Here's what Roone himself said about Ralph, quote, "He's genius. There's him and there's everybody else. He's invented so much. A lot of the things I've done are copied from him." So I can't imagine higher praise than that.
Roone and Jeff Mason will be able to talk far better than I will be about this, but Roone loved Ralph, and they were peas in a pod. They were both blue sky thinkers who shared a belief that sports on TV should be entertainment with lots of storytelling. Maybe if I could take a sidebar here, I'd like to talk a little bit about Ralph and Calgary. Back in 1984, Johnny Esau, who was then the head of CTV Sports, shocked a lot of people when he pulled a rabbit out of the hat and he stole the Canadian broadcast rights for the '88 Olympics away from CBC. And this caused some consternation amongst international broadcasters, because back then, unlike now, the IOC did not have its own division that produced the world feed of Olympic Games. That part of the deal was that the rights holder of the host country had to mount the world feed. At the time, CTV didn't have a very robust sports department, and so you had broadcasters from the EBU, the then Soviet Union, NHK in Japan, the BBC. They were all worried about the quality of coverage they were going to get in '88. But all of that concern disappeared in an instant when Phyllis Switzer who had been hired as the CEO of the CTV host broadcaster team, made the announcement that she had hired Ralph as her head of production. International broadcasters knew Ralph well from the time that he had been hired by ABC to produce hockey in Innsbruck in '76, Lake Placid in '80, and then Sarajevo in '84. You know, the International Sports Broadcasters Club is a small one, and Ralph's presence at those games earned him a place in that group. Personally, I got what I consider to be the most significant phone call of my broadcast life, my professional life, in June of 86. And it was Ralph, and he wanted me to come to Calgary, move to Calgary, and be his 2IC to produce the world feed of the Olympics. Obviously, it was a no-brainer to accept, and I got to work closely with Ralph for 18 months leading up to and during the game. I think we were a pretty good match. He was the ideas guy that had the vision and the courage to pursue that vision, and I was happy to be the guy that sort of made all the details work and the trains were on time. Ralph's philosophy for how the Calgary host broadcaster would work was he was a trailblazer in that he said, we're going to go find the best people, the best person in the world in each of the various Olympic disciplines, and we're going to hire them to be the head of the venue at that sport for our coverage. So we went and we hired a fella from Finland to be our cross country guy, our biathlon guy. We hired a fella from Norway to be our cross country guy. We hired Martin Lindenberg from the Netherlands to be our speed skating guy. We didn't need to hire anybody to do hockey, obviously, or curling. And then the second part of the philosophy was once we had these experts, then we would fill the rest of the production crews with the best Canadians we could find. And what ended up happening was that anybody who was anybody in sports television in 1987 and 88 worked together on a team. And these were all folks who would normally have been competitors, but they all came together and under Ralph's leadership. And you look back at the names who were on that list of and these are the behind the scenes guys, but and women, people like Ron Harrison, Larry Brown, and John Shannon, Rick Briggs-Jude, and a young lady who worked on our figure skating crew named Laura Mellanby. Another indication, and Jeff will be able to talk about this from his perspective, that for the first time, ABC decided that they did not have to mount their own separate production from the world feed. Up to that point, if my memory serves correct, ABC would always go in and do their own feed from start to finish. In Calgary, there was enough trust, and the root of this trust was Roon's respect for Ralph. There was enough trust that we ended up, the host broadcaster, CTV, working very closely with the guys at ABC. We shared production plans. We jointly built the graphic design for the games. We shared compounds at the venues. They lent us Doug Wilson, who at the time was the best figure skating director in the world. They lent Doug to us, and he worked for the host broadcaster unit. And it was entirely the relationship that Roon had with Ralph. And I'll end this segment talking about a story that I've heard, but I've never been able to confirm that it's true. But it's a fun story to hear. NBC had broadcast the Winter Games in '72 in Japan. And so Roone had to build his ABC team for 76 in Innsbruck from scratch. And he knew that the best hockey production people at the time were in Canada. And he'd heard about a guy named Ralph who was considered the guy for hockey production. So Roone arranged for one of his people to arrange for Ralph from Canada to come and produce some items, I think, for Wide World of Sports or something or other, which was a bit of an in-person audition. As some of you may remember, there was another Ralph in sports production in Canada. And the story goes that a mistake was made, and it was the other Ralph who got invited to the audition, and Roone was less than impressed. But fortunately, the mistake was realized, and our Ralph got his chance to go and audition, and the rest is history.
Well, Doug, I want you to stick around while we bring in Jeff Mason, and maybe he can confirm these details. I want to mention about Jeff, the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame, of which Jeff Mason is a member, described him as one of sports television's most accomplished executives. And he once had the great good fortune and the great good sense to hire Ralph Mellanby. So, Jeff, let me start off by asking you, when ABC in the States came looking for a director in 76 in Innsbruck, it was Ralph who convinced you to hire him rather than taking away one of his directors? Oh, muted.
You're muted, Jeff. You've been talking to Laura.
I'm just like Laura. It happens to me all the time. About 2 years before Innsbruck, we were sussing through our production teams, and Roone looked at me and he said, "We got to do better in hockey. And hockey's going to be big in Innsbruck. And, you know, I hear that there's this guy up in Canada who Hockey Night in Canada and all that. Get him on the phone and let's see if he's available and how we can work something out." I had forgotten about the other Ralph story, which need not be elaborated upon. And I got Ralph on the phone. I said, you know, we gotta upgrade our product here. We need to raise our game, as it were. And he could not have been more available. He could not have been more classy in terms of his response. And the rest, as they say, is history. I mean, Doug just walked you through. In those days, we were all together. We were a team. We all wanted each other to succeed. There was not this, well, there wasn't as much money involved. That helped a little bit. But there wasn't this negative, competitive, we're better than you are kind of thing. We all just wanted to succeed. And I was blessed. I mean, I worked with Doug, obviously. I worked with Scott Moore. I just got a text, actually, from Scott Moore, who asked me to send his best to everybody. He says, "Loving this show. It's old home week. We are now heading out to Laguna for dinner, so we'll watch the rest online tomorrow. Be brilliant. Say hello to everybody." I mean, that's who we were, you know, Scott, Doug, Johnny Esau, Oliver Babarat, Martin Lindenberg from Holland, who did speech. We were just, we worked together all the time. We knew how we could make each other better. We were completely unselfish in that regard. And I have to tell you, I think Doug would agree with me. And I suspect, you know, Don Cherry sort of alluded to it. Those were the glory days, okay? There were two names in sports television, all right? And in the pantheon of sports TV, there were two names, one in U.S., Roone Arledge, and one in Canada, Ralph Mellanby. And there was such a mutual respect and commitment to each other that it just washed across everything we did. And we were doing shows together in Europe and Canada and US, and it could not have been any better. It just could not have been any better. And oh, by the way, I think we all did some really good television. Roone and Ralph emphasized all the time, as someone else said earlier, we're not doing stories about pucks and hockey sticks. We're doing stories about people. We got to tell stories about people. Focus on the people. And so it couldn't have been any better. He became a really dear friend of mine. We thought a lot alike about a lot of things. We were blessed to have him come down to Lake Placid or Lake George 2 years ago. We had a big ABC Sports reunion of all the Olympic people and wide world of sports people. And Ralph was, we could not have had the reunion without Ralph. And he absolutely had a blast being with us. He was beloved, he was honored, and he was respected more so than most. And I am honored and humbly thank you all and love Laura like a sister for having me included in this incredible opportunity. He was the best there ever was.
You mentioned, Jeff, the storytelling and that it's about people. And I remember reading in '88 when he was in charge of the world feed, he said, we're going to be about entertainment and we're going to tell stories. And if all the other countries don't like it, basically the hell with them, because we're going to be about entertainment. We're going to be about drama.
Well, when he said it, he knew, because as Doug clearly articulated 10 minutes ago, we all knew what he had in mind. So he could go on record with zero risk about, getting that done, because he knew we were all in on that. We signed up for whatever it was he wanted to put out there. He knew we were going to love it. He knew it was going to work. And you know what? It did. And we were blessed and honored to be in his company as we all put Calgary together.